moment. But that's why we have these conversations. Mitch, I know we're looking for a working title, but we cannot name the podcast The Business of Theater, Time to Seize the Day.
Actually, it's probably very appropriate since they're doing a big concert version of Les Mis coming up, right?
Yeah, Les Mis, but Seize the Day is from Newsies.
For Newsies.
Yeah.
Yes, but it's
I know there's a lot going on right now that can kind of attach to this, but it's basically like meeting the moment. So I think it fits, but it's, if we have to explain all that, it's not a working title.
there you go. So we're not gonna have it this week again.
So we ain't got it. We ain't got it. All right. This is The Business of Theater, a working title. I'm Darnelle Radford.
I'm Mitch Weiss.
And let's get down to business. So, Mitch, Broadway is patting itself on the back for a very successful season
Which
by various standards, but there's still, the house is still on, you know, unsecure footing.
yeah, well, as opposed to just 2 weeks ago when the, New York Times reported that almost all the Broadway musicals were losing money. So, the question just is, under whose terms, and why do we ever use the word successful
Yeah,
unless it's both artistically and financially successful?
I know. And like, if the season ends, right? If the season ends, like, wasn't that a successful season?
The seasons overlap. I don't
What
even
is the term?
understand.
I know. Yeah.
You just arbitrarily choose a season from September, and in the middle of it, we have our Tony Awards, as opposed to at the end of the season, right? The seasons are a mix of years from September through June, even though there are shows during the summer. None of it makes sense. That should be our subtitle. The
None
Business
of
of
it makes
Broadway.
sense.
None of it makes sense.
All right. We'll put
There
it
we
in a
go.
rejected pile.
Which is, by the way, why I wrote the book, The Business of Broadway, is to show in the many ways that things don't make sense,
Yes.
but why they are there, because it made sense to start that way. Anyway,
Yes.
moving right along, which leads us to the other subtitle, which is Let's Go on Strike.
Let's go on strike. Let's have a strike. We'll change to the tune of a Kiki. So the musicians, well, I mean, one of the most recent kind of chime-ins about this is that Broadway musicians have voted to authorize a strike along with the actors because they are at disagreements with the Broadway League about various things, particularly having to do with healthcare and wage cuts and
Well, and
what
it's
else?
different. Actors Equity has slightly different issues than the musicians union.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, the other unions are going to back whoever goes on strike if they go on strike.
Hmm.
Right now, it's a negotiating ploy because I assume, and I have no inside knowledge of this, but I assume one side or the other is being obnoxious and not showing up with good intentions to negotiations. If they had
Mm.
good intentions, we all like each other on Broadway. In fact,
Hmm.
some of the people who are on the Broadway League negotiating for the producers are the same people in the other unions. So it's a cross link here. So what do you do with that? And why do you have to threaten strikes in order just to get people to talk to you honestly? We're in financially difficult times.
Yeah.
Our government right now has put us there. We're all worried about health care. That's the government shutdown right now, correct?
Hmm.
So we have a government shutdown supposedly over renewing healthcare credits, but we also have a city, New York, we have someone running for mayor who his entire platform is the city is not affordable. We have to make it affordable. Well, we're all living that way. I know my expenses just going to the grocery store, they are almost double what they were just a few years ago. And they're not coming down. So, what do we do even if you have a decent Broadway salary, right? What do you do?
Yeah.
It's time for negotiations for 2 of the 18 Broadway unions, and they don't even affect all the shows. I assume you read that there are shows on different contracts that aren't even
Yeah,
affected by this negotiation.
I know. How many potential unions are there on a show? Like 18?
18 unions.
18. Yeah. And I know that that's what makes it tricky too, because it's not every union ready. Like same thing, a month ago, here in Philadelphia, SEPTA, our public transit authority, made some changes. Did some changes because of a lack of funding coming from Harrisburg. And really, this is the part that is kind of frustrating. It's like I heard somebody say it on a news cycle the other day that it's not the administration's money, it's the people's money.
Mhm.
So they've made all these changes that the people didn't want, and now these things that the people need are being compromised.
Well, that happens more frequently than not,
Yeah, yeah.
right? I will say I have experienced, quote unquote, the leaders of my union and witnessed other unions that have made some terrible decisions on behalf of their members. And what do you do with that? That's internally,
Yeah.
right? And it affects people's salaries and their benefits. Healthcare is the hardest one. We have so many actors who cannot even get healthcare even though they're working. Their system is very different than most of us. They don't, just by the fact that they're working doesn't entitle them to health insurance.
Mhm.
It's an you work, you have to work X number of weeks and make X amount of money, and then the following half year, you can get health care. So while you're working, you can be in danger of getting sick or hurt, but you have no health care. So and others, of course, are quote unquote the regular weekly contribution into healthcare, and you have healthcare. So
Mhm.
all these 18 unions are very different. So the musicians union and what the actors equity want are different. The amount of money they're asking for and the increase is different. The healthcare situation is different, and the producers are worried about their shows bringing in just breaking even, nevertheless making a profit.
Yeah.
And they have to find time to negotiate for the people who they employ. That's
I
tricky.
I always find this interesting. I feel like there's never enough time to educate everybody on the situation.
Never.
You get, let's say it's your first day of rehearsal. Are you really going to tell this team that money is tight in the organization and they had to make changes and so on? Or are you just going to soldier through and try not to burden them with it because they're also trying to prepare for a show and it's really not about them, the issues that are going on organizationally, but it is helpful for us to know these things. And there isn't really a good time to educate people who aren't dealing with it directly about it.
Well, and then the question is, and this has always been the case, if you are on the producing or investing end of theater, you potentially can make an amazing amount of money on the back end, but you pay people a weekly salary because they have no investment in the show. They will never get more than their weekly salary, even if the show turns into Hamilton or Wicked. But the investor can end up making millions or lose all of it. But that's the risk that the producing end takes versus the employee end, which just goes, I got to work 8 shows a week. I got to pay for my mortgage and whatever. I got to do the best I can. I'm going to ask you for the most I can get
Yeah. And
because
my
I
check
can't.
better clear.
Absolutely. Well, that's again why the unions have a thing called bonds, that
Mhm.
money representing 2 weeks of salary and benefits must be put in escrow on behalf of whoever the employees are, because producers have just split town without paying them for the last 2 weeks of the show. So to make sure that doesn't happen, the unions now require this money up front in a bank,
Yeah.
right? The if people weren't trying to get away with things, then you don't need the union to fight for it. On the other hand, as many politicians will say, there are good people on both sides. The thing is, if they're honestly sitting across the table from each other, trying to make it work, then who
Yeah.
wins? How do they get to that? And that's tricky.
Well, the other point about this is that I believe, at least the document says, the musician's most recent contract expired August 1st. They're
Mhm.
currently working without a contract, well, without a new contract. And so there are conversations. There have been conversations. And so I guess you get to a point where you're just like, I don't know, these conversations aren't going anywhere. And we have to, I don't know if striking is the answer. It's just interesting how there's a lot of things that, we do in business at the very last minute for whatever reason. Like, a grant proposal is submitted at 4:40 and it's due at five
Yeah.
o'clock. I don't know why, but it's just you need as much time as you need for it. And even though sometimes in terms of creativity, you can say something like a deadline focuses the lights. That's not always the case, because they will reach this deadline and get way past that deadline and still there's no resolution. But, in our pre-interview, we chatted about that there's probably some bad actors or potentially bad actors or some name calling and some shots fired at the table, which prompt us to get to this point.
Yeah, in order to get to a strike, everyone takes that seriously. You're putting a lot of people out of work. And it's not the same thing as a government shutdown, by the way. This is very personal. And you've got people who want nothing more than to show up at that show and put on a performance, and that's all they care about. So if it gets to the point of threatening, it's because somewhere things aren't moving forward, that somebody is not trying hard enough. Sometimes it's almost an impossible situation. But when you think about money, and that's basically what healthcare is about, it's what salaries are about, unless there is a unique issue that nobody knows what to do about, it really comes down to having good people trying to find the compromise.
Yeah.
And sometimes the compromise is wrong. Because if you need health care and the compromise is we're only going to give you painted toenails, right? That's not the answer. So it really is amazing that these people figure this out. The trick, and I do want to say on behalf of unions, which I must be honest, I am a union man. I believe in them. Think, especially on Broadway, they have been extremely reasonable. And I've been around these negotiations and unions, forgive me for how long, for 40 something years. There have been times where one side or the other is a very bad player, and they will literally say, "We don't have time to schedule a meeting with you, even though the contract is expired, until a month and a half from now." So they set up that meeting, and then they walk in and say, "We don't feel like talking to you," and they walk out. That's a purposeful insult. And then they say, well, the next time we're willing to meet with you is another month and a half. At that point, you start getting angry, right? And then you start going back and forth and you do whatever you can. And at some point, this is my guess. This is why we're threatening strikes. Somebody just isn't showing up with good faith. They're either not showing up or they're showing up without good faith. And that's a shame. Now, it could be on the union side, they could be asking for outrageous things, but, the 2 issues, basic salary and healthcare, don't sound like unreasonable issues to be discussing.
Yeah. I wanted to
But we're not there, so I don't know.
no. And I wanted to point out because I only mentioned the musician's contract expiring August 1st, that Actors Equity Association, the standard production contract expired September 28th, which is interesting because we were there were some delays in our communication with Actors Equity, and I wonder if this was part of it.
It could
Yeah.
be. We also Equity has a new president, Brooke Shields,
Mhm.
and she just started this summer.
Yeah.
So she may be trying to put together her best foot forward
Mhm.
on behalf of the union. It also can be that she was elected because there were issues that the union was very concerned about, and she took up the charge of it.
Yeah.
I don't know. All I can say is, having been involved in discussions for negotiations of certain unions, that all of what I'm saying sounds like scenarios that have already existed and are pretty normal. We've had strikes on Broadway, which were god awful, cost a lot of money, hurt a lot of people. Let's hope we don't get there.
Yeah. Yeah. I there's even a letter that 1,300 actors and stage managers wrote to the Broadway League. And there's a snippet of it where they say 8 times a week we show up for our audiences, but what audiences don't see are all the additional hours behind the scenes it takes to stay show ready. The work is intense, the schedules are grueling, and we show up with extraordinary skill, passion, and commitment. Now we're asking you to show up for us. It is a tough thing because we know that everybody is bringing it.
Yeah.
Everybody's bringing it, you
And
know?
they're being asked to do, many of them are
Mhm.
being asked to do what I consider personally to be very dangerous things.
Yeah.
I know personally of a good number of actor, dancers, singers who have gotten hurt to the point that they cannot perform anymore because of what they were asked to do in a show. And at a certain point, you get away with it, but 8 times a week, chances are you can have an accident.
Yeah.
Now that's maybe covered, assuming they have health care, right? And there's the next issue. The rule books for these unions are 100 plus pages of small print. Some of the rules are ridiculous, and they were created to spite the producers. And the producers, in return, have written rules that spite the employees. So there's been a lot of anger here along the way. But the bottom line is, when you show up for work at Wicked, people are happy to be there. You're happy to be working for the person who's your boss, and you're most happy to be in front of an audience. So, how do we balance the business end of this with the reason we're in the industry? Which, by the way, should include being able to have a nice life with your family.
Mhm.
Right? That would be
I know.
nice.
I know sometimes we're frustrated with the union for various things, but we remind ourselves like they're here to protect the artists and we want that. It's just we just wish this was easier, you know? Like I don't want an artist to feel like they're missing something that's going to make them feel good about, you know, proceeding in this project with us. It's just so interesting how these things come up. Especially it's just like you let the contract expire. Like you didn't know it was your job to, maintain this contract, but also renew a contract.
But again,
I know,
you have 18 unions.
I know.
Sometimes the negotiations overlap. And now I'm giving an excuse to the producing end, because the unions are ready, because they only have to worry about themselves. So they
Yeah.
prepare for negotiations. But on the producing end, I'll give them the benefit of this doubt. They have a lot of different areas to think about, and they are trying to keep costs down. They usually fail, is my experience, because they end up with the smallest increase that they can get away with. We understand that. At the same point, it's still an increase.
Mm,
And again, in our pre-talk, and I bring this up, my argument for what's going on with the costs on Broadway. 30 years ago, an electrician on a show explained to me, he was very angry because there had been a producer that claimed that stagehands, which the electrician was part of that union, stagehands were the cause of the expensive prices on Broadway. And he was furious because while he was making a living salary, he couldn't afford to buy a house, and he couldn't afford to have a family. That's at that time. So his argument was, if you give us what used to be a normal Broadway set, which has a room in it, a wall, the actors come on, they do whatever they do, they leave, and the lights go down, the lights come up, there's a couple of special effects. You can get away with having 2 or 3 electricians on that show. But if you bring me a show with 19 different sets that come up from the floor, come from down, have 240 moving lights, in addition to another 200 stationary lights, and you have 3 fire effects, lights on every part of the props that come rolling in and rolling out, which mean they're part of the electrics department, and they all happen on one cue. That means one person can't run them. So you have created a situation that you, the producer, needs to hire more electricians. That is not my personal fault, he says. I'm not charging you any more, but you have to hire more people because you brought a set and the requirement for lights that requires more people. If you reduce that requirement, your show gets cheaper. So stop blaming it on my personal salary and figure out that you can design a show that's less expensive. Of course, then Disney came onto Broadway and they went the opposite direction and they made everyone compete to have a bigger set, right? And that was the next problem. So I just wanted to represent that. No question, having done the budgets personally for a ton of Broadway shows, I know how expensive it is. The benefits are a fortune. When you add pension and health care and annuity and sick pay and vacation pay to somebody's salary, you double it. So if someone's making $2,000 a week, you're actually paying $4,000. That's a lot of money for the show. Then you say, well, I have this number of actors. Well, okay, do a show with 5 actors instead of 40 actors. The show will be cheaper. But if your show requires 40 actors, what are you supposed to do? You have to hire 40 actors and you have to have understudies to protect your show, not because someone's forcing you down your throat, right? People get sick and you need to have an understudy. So you put all that together, it's expensive. So that is, I see both sides of this issue. On the production, I'm saying, how come a show costs $30 million in 2025? And how do you ever pay that back? And my argument would be to the investors, don't invest in a show that costs $30 million. Find a show that the producer has figured out how to bring it back down to 20 million. It'd still be a gigantic musical. Expect that from your producer. And the producers would argue with me, hey, the director tells me what to do and we want to put on a big hit. I don't know the answer to that, except you sit across the table and you negotiate in good faith and you avoid a strike. That's the bottom line.
That's the bottom line.
Go ahead, Darnell. Now you argue with me. Tell me where I'm wrong.
No, I mean, I don't have a side in this. One, like, everybody's doing amazing work, and I know the prices keep going up, but my initial thought without, like, having real concrete information was like, is this because the house itself is expensive to exist in? Like, is that standing in the way too? But, like, no, it's not just that, but that's probably a drop in the bucket considering what the expectations were for the overall production.
Well,
Like, we
and
know
I'm
how
going to
much.
take it back. 40% of a Broadway budget goes to the theater. Now, that includes, by the way, to be fair, that includes the theater's employees, which is the box office personnel, the custodians, the security, which is very important, the ushers, and the musicians. The musicians actually work for the theater, not for the
Hmm,
show. It's a very odd union thing.
interesting.
So, but 40% of that budget is never going to be seen by the people who produce the show.
Hmm.
So now the question is that fair? Because within that is also a flat rent that the theater owner wants. plus a percentage of all the income at the box office, a royalty. And that means that if you end up with Hamilton or Wicked, the theater is making a fortune as well as the show. Now, the question is that fair? Should that be renegotiated? How do you renegotiate it? There's no union to sit down with. The theater says, you want to come rent my theater? This is the deal. And it's negotiable. I mean, the general manager will negotiate with the theater, but it's pretty much known what each theater costs.
Yeah.
So there's so many angles to the cost of theater
Yeah,
and
and they would know that coming in.
and marketing. Try now that there's social media and there are less newspapers and you have television ads and you have what all the other places and all these ad agencies want money. So that's 20% of your budget. These are no secrets. And by the way, some people pay a lot more than 20% of their budget to get the ads out there. But I'm giving you real generalities. So now we have the theater getting 40%. You're paying 20% of your budget to the ad agency, which of course has to buy time and space for you. So it's not just that you're paying them. That's 60% already. You haven't paid your actors. You haven't paid your writer or your director or your designers or your investors. Nobody else has gotten any money yet. So how does one union per se in each negotiation make the difference except to say, if you could reduce everybody's prices, then yeah, theater would cost less, right? I don't know the answer.
And they needed most of that money in advance because, some of those people did get paid before opening night.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's,
Yeah.
I know, and sometimes, sometimes you gotta think about it. This is why this is what I say sometimes to my closest, that we have to be how do I say this? Like, you have to be careful who we're airing our grievances to. You know what I mean? Sometimes internally we'll say something about a production or a company, what have you, because we have the inside track. But somebody on the outside who's just deciding if they should support it or not, sometimes they hear those things and they just back out altogether. Like if there's a grievance between actors and the producer, right? That doesn't necessarily affect the show itself. This is a grievance that they have, you know, that they haven't worked out. If this reaches the audience, potentially the audience might decide not to patronize that show because they have internal grievance that has nothing to do with the quality of the show. But it's just interesting how these every little thing affects, you know, whether this is going to sell or not. It is kind of sad that that is the case. I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm not saying we should keep our mouths shut for things like that, but I'm saying like sometimes something that isn't that big can cost a lot
Mhm.
more than you think, and this is what makes our industry so unique and also very tricky.
Well, it does also come down to, and you make a very good point, but if you look at government whistleblowers, the
Hmm.
question is, who are you hurting the most? And yet, if you don't open your mouth, who are you hurting?
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's again, it's the same problem. And our problem as reasonable people is that we see issues on both sides, right? Or on multiple sides. It's a circumstance. It's part of the reason for me, and we have had our podcast sessions talk about this before, why I was hoping during the pandemic, our industry had a discussion about a new normal because you can't just negotiate with equity and decide we're going to pay everyone in the industry a different way. And that will help solve this problem and give maybe you, and this is please, everyone listening, I'm just using this as a hypothetical kind of fun thing to talk about. I can get in a lot of trouble here. But if we said everybody makes the same amount of money, but there are royalties for everyone, the actors, the original actors will make a percentage just like the designers may, or maybe just and the stagehands and the musicians, everyone who invests their time in the show gets a piece of it. And that means you get paid more on the back end if your show is a hit. Now, of course, that risks the fact that the people putting in so much of the time, 8 shows a week, are making less money up front. But that is a legitimate discussion if you're going to overhaul the entire industry. You can't do it one union at a time, right? So to say actors, now we're going to pay you less, but we're going to give you a percentage of the show if your show runs, but we're going to pay the musicians twice as much as you because that's a different deal. That doesn't work. So we're stuck with an industry that is so embedded in its process, which is why, again, I can write a book called The Business of Broadway, because even from the day I wrote it, the system still is almost identical. I'd say 99% of what I wrote when I first wrote the book is the same even after the pandemic. The only
Hmm.
difference, of course, is the salaries that are in the book. They've gone up. But if you drop the salaries out, the book could have been written last week. And that, to me, is a problem. I'd like the book to be totally out of date, right?
Yeah.
And to say, hey, we have reinvented ourselves. We found a better way to put on theater and to make people in the industry be able to survive. And we haven't done that. But the other part of this, and you know this from working in nonprofit, the nonprofit's a completely different system than the Broadway system. They're not even close. So when we talk about how much you pay somebody or what kind of health care you get or don't get, and how people who only work twice a year in regional theaters, that they have to have completely second jobs in order to just pay rent. We have an industry that is not uniform. So I guess I'm going to talk to myself, shut up and let the people who are in the middle of this industry do what they have to do. And if that means striking, which is, oh God, is that horrible? We have stories about past strikes. They have destroyed shows. They have destroyed employment. The amount of losses on shows that happened because there was a strike. Shows never reopened.
Yeah.
It was almost like having another pandemic that just shut everything down. And when you came out of it, you couldn't just pick up where you left off. Why do we? And plus, there are shows where if this is 2 unions, that's going to affect the other 16. Everyone goes out of work. So what can we do? And you and I can't do anything, right? We're not in that
Let's
position.
get in that room and have a chat with everybody. I need
Yeah,
everyone to settle down first.
yeah. And then half of them walk out.
Does everyone have a drink? Okay.
That would
Like
be that would be
we're
helpful.
we're just working up the wrong things. I just want to make sure the conditions in this room are ideal for us to negotiate. Is the temperature right? Do we need to adjust the thermostat?
Here's an interesting thing. It has nothing to do with directly these 2 negotiations, but there are
Yeah.
still Broadway theaters that are not accessible. You cannot go to the bathroom in at least one Broadway theater if you are in a wheelchair or are disabled. You have to literally leave the building and go to a hotel next door.
Wow.
Now, that's not because people are against fixing it, even though it costs a lot of money. There are reasons because the building may be under a special code with the city and they're not allowed to make physical changes to the building. And then it costs a fortune to apply for a variance. And that takes 10 years to get. And in the meantime, patrons come in and they can't even go to the bathroom. And these things come up in union negotiations. Many of them, somebody will say, hey, it's not our doing. And then it just gets thrown away. And so they move on to the next topic. So there are a lot of things that are asked for that don't happen. So we end up with just basically 2 important things, according to the newspaper reports: healthcare and salary, right? And if that's it for everybody, hey, look, those of us who get pension, we get a small cost of living increase each year, but it doesn't compared to inflation, right? So technically, I'd like to negotiate with the government and saying, hey, wait a minute, your inflation hit what number? And you're only giving me of my money that I invested in Social Security along the way, you're only giving me back less than I can to keep up with inflation.
Yeah.
So here we go with a union saying, you're paying me, but inflation happened and you're not, we're asking for something that helps us keep up with it, not that makes us richer. And the producers are going, look what just happened to all our shows. They all lost money because the
Yeah.
expenses were so high. I don't know
I
how
know,
you solve that.
and it's unfortunate that we're always looking to blame someone, 'cause my first thought was like, "I don't know, how was your marketing?" You know, like, perhaps the marketing wasn't effective enough.
Or maybe the show wasn't good.
Yeah.
That's
I know
that's
no one wants to admit that
that's right.
perhaps their show just isn't good.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They were like, "But it's new, how would they know if they didn't come see it?" Like, there's a way to let them know this is a hit, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, and
Yeah.
and those things are changing, by the minute too, like, used to be able to kind of rely on or maybe depend upon a New York Times review,
All right. I'm
maybe
gonna
not so much.
I mean, no, not so much. I'm going to let us wind down with one story of one specific show, just so
Okay,
we end up with um, during a strike.
yeah,
Al Prince produced an environmental version of Leonard Bernstein, Stephen Sondheim. Had gotten involved in it. Candide on Broadway. It had started. This is just because I'm old enough to have been there. This started at Brooklyn Academy of Music. They had 18 musicians at Brooklyn Academy of Music, and the cast would walk in between different sections of the audience. The basic seating was taken out. So in order to move the show to Broadway, they had to do the same thing it was in the Broadway theater. They had to take out all the seats. They created benches with sawdust on the floor. They served beer during the production. So you can sit there with your beer and watch these operatic voices go around and try to make fun of the topic that it was all about. And it was a stunning production, got great reviews. At the time, the Musicians Union at the Broadway theater had a requirement. Any musical coming into this particular theater, because of its size, must have 26 musicians. I'm sorry, take that back. It was 23 musicians. I apologize, historians, if I'm wrong on the exact number. That meant that the musicians union said you must hire 5 or 6 more musicians than you used in the production at Brooklyn Academy of Music. The orchestrations were already done. They already knew the show. But if they move into that theater, they have to hire more musicians, which they did not need and which there were no orchestrations for. So what happened was, as the show ran and it was doing very well, there was a strike. So all the shows shut down. When the strike was over, the Candide realized they couldn't afford to reopen. Reopening is a whole nother budgetary issue. How do you get everyone back? Rehearsals, you have to start everything up again, and it costs money. So they did the math. The amount of money they spent on those extra musicians came to $300,000. The amount of money when the show closed because of the strike that the show lost and was not able to return to its investors was $300,000.
the
So
cost
the
of hiring the
exact
extra.
cost of those extra musicians. Now, your question is, or your issue is, everyone knew before you go into that theater what the rules were.
Hmm,
It wasn't a surprise. No one threw it at them. They could have possibly picked a different theater that required less musicians. But for the reason of whatever the production needs of that show, or maybe it was the only theater available. Who knows? But it was the exact cost. So the investors lost $300,000 because of a union requirement. Since then, that requirement has been reduced in every theater on Broadway. Now there are less musicians. They have already given up the number of jobs that they can get on Broadway. It's been reduced. There's still every theater that's a musical theater still has a requirement as to how many musicians must work there. And they're all different based on the number of seats in the theater. But the effect of a strike, because it very possibly, if that show had run longer, it would have made up that difference. But the strike made it impossible. And with that loss of money, they didn't have extra money in the bank to reopen the show.
Yeah.
So it's just one story, one show, but there are consequences,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, when somebody's at home saying like, "Bring back the show, we'll gladly pay for it." There's a ton of expense just to even allow for you to buy a ticket for that show.
Yeah. Or to even
Yeah.
know it's reopening and tickets are
Mhm.
on sale again.
Yeah.
Especially that first week, not enough people will show up because it just opened,
Mhm.
right? So
Yeah,
now you're subsidizing lost tickets that first week. And you have to, where does that money come from? There are lots of issues.
we'll have to in a future episode, we'll have to talk about the Jellicle Ball coming to Broadway
Yeah.
and Schmigadoon leaping off of television screens after poor ratings and going to Broadway.
And we should add to the joy of this because the one
Yeah.
thing that I will never give up on Broadway, and we should always be positive, is the variety. I can I look at what's on Broadway and I'm going, really, what am I in the mood for? Wow,
Mhm.
do I really want that? Oh, but look, there's this over here. There's just so much.
I mean,
And
and
it's
that's
exciting.
kind of the thought process if you're standing at TKTS. You're sorta open to anything, there when you're waiting in that line. You didn't plan in advance. You might come to see anything by the time you get to the line, which is just
And
interesting, but that's why it's
unfortunately,
valuable.
many times you're disappointed.
Hmm.
It's as much you're still getting live entertainment and you're at the TKTS booth, you're getting it at half price, right?
Yeah.
But it's still, yeah, we got to bring Broadway prices down. It's not going to happen. Yeah, we got to reduce the cost of theater. Not going to happen. What is going to happen is the type of show that can be produced. If your purpose is to make money, if your purpose is to do art, then put on Ragtime, which has a gazillion number of cast members, a gazillion number of musicians, usually a giant set, different sets and props. That, and which is interesting, by the way, Ragtime is not affected, will not be affected by the strike because
Mm.
it's produced by Lincoln Center,
Lincoln
and
Center.
Lincoln Center is not on a Broadway production contract. They have a completely different agreement with Actors Equity and the Musicians Union. So they will not, and their contract hasn't expired. So they're not at odds at all.
Yeah.
And there are a
Interesting.
number of other shows like that. It's a very complex industry.
That's why they gotta pick up your book so they can understand it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's fun. It is fun. You know it. Being an insider, but even if you're not, you can feel it. You just feel people walk out of a theater on Broadway and the energy. My God, just standing outside while they come out, you feel good.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we'll shamelessly plug your book, The Business of Broadway:
Thank
An
you.
Insider's Guide to Working, Producing, and Investing in the World's Greatest Theater Community.
And again, I apologize that the salaries are very old.
Yes, but then you can go to our website, em3ry.com, and get all those updates
Yeah.
uh, that we updated in the book over the years. Okay, before we head out, what is do you have one singular sensation?
Ooh, 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 ooh. You should go first, and I'll remember. I did have one. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll tell you my one singular sensation is the 2025 Barrymore Awards here in
Ah,
Philadelphia. It's on October 20th. It's a Monday, and it is a celebration of excellence in Philadelphia theater. We call it Theater Prom. And it is an opportunity for us to get together and look back at the past season and the wonderful moments that were in it and the artists who made it happen. So that's on Monday, October 20th. There's a link in our show notes so you can go get tickets and celebrate with us.
Excellent, excellent. I have a very quick singular sensation.
Mhm.
There are, I think, there are currently upwards of 40 off-Broadway shows running in New York. And
Hmm.
that just means because Broadway isn't the only place to see professional theater. And these are smaller theaters, you're up close, they're cheaper, magnificent stuff, a wide variety.
Yeah.
And certainly a lot of shows that are on Broadway. Liberation, which just opened on Broadway. Cat's Jellicle Ball was off Broadway and is now moving there. Rent started off Broadway. So many shows. Oh, A Chorus Line started off Broadway. Hamilton started off Broadway. It's just exciting that so much is going on. That's
Hmm.
my singular sensation.
40 off Broadway shows
All right. I was right.
all in
Is it
one.
40? Yeah.
No, I mean, that's what you put.
Yeah.
If it's not, if there's more, I'll
No,
just adjust it.
I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure. I'm pretty sure that's around the right number.
It's good, but all of this is to say, see more theater. Go see more theater. There's
Yeah.
so many options out there. There's discounts through TKTS, but you can also get lower cost tickets by going to off Broadway and off Broadway and regional circuits. Anywhere you live, there is theater nearby. And you should see more theater. Be a part of that conversation as you are a part of ours. So thank you for tuning in and listening to us ramble about about what needs to be done in a business to help provide real solutions. I think the conversation keeps it going because it's really about there isn't a right answer. There's just, pressing on moving forward. And we'll get there.
And as they say, Broadway is not dead, theater is not dead. It's still here. It will still be here. We will get over whatever problems are going on now, and there'll be great stuff in the future.
And if you're
If you wanna be
frustrated,
part of
get
it,
into your art.
that's it. And you can be part of it by either working in the industry, by investing in the industry, giving money to nonprofits. Lord knows the government is disappearing from their specter, so help them out. But most importantly, Darnell, as you said, go see the show.
Yeah. Go see the show. And that's The Business of Theater, a working title. I'm Darnell Radford,
I'm Mitch Weiss.
and we will see you at the theater because
Bye
you're going to
bye.
see more theater.
That's right.